off the unordered list, and we'll do it like that. So let's try this out one more time. So refresh, test map, and you can see that we're outputting all of that content. So all we have to do we still have to join it. So we didn't actually output that joined value. So let's take that value, and instead of just doing the HTML, let's join that together. So we do the join and refresh and try that one more time. And there we've got our output. So now the objective is to take what you've learned in this lesson about maps and apply that down here with similar to what the example is that we built out earlier, and using that random user API value, the results. So remember, it's returning back an array. So you can take that array, you can map it, and you can return back, you can format the HTML, join it together, and then output it within your output element. And coming up next, I'll show you the solution to this exercise. In the previous lesson, we saw how we can use map in order to take a bunch of values from an array and output a brand new array. And we also saw how we can join it together to create a string value and then use that string value within our inner HTML. So we want to do the same thing for the results from random user ME API. And we've already got the results back in a JSON format. We already saw that we do have those results. So we wanted to do something similar to what we did up here, and that was the purpose of this exercise, was to try this out using map in order to map out those values. So we know that the data results that are coming in, so this is going to be an array, and we're just simply taking that people array that we have, so this is the existing array, and then we're mapping out all of those values. So we're taking the values, and right now we know that from earlier, we know that the people array actually has some additional options here that we need to account for. So we need to still build that out before we return back those values, and this is where we need to do the name first as well. So we've got our value. And for now, what I'm going to do is I'll console log it out so we can take a closer look at actually what we're seeing as we're logging it out. All of these values, but we're also going to be grabbing the name value for it. So for now, let's get rid of this, and we're going to return back just the index values, and then we're going to take all of those returned index values and we're going to apply it to output. So we're going to take that HTML, join it together, and we should have some type of output. So let's try that out. So get user. So we get all of the index values from the user, and you can see within the console log, we're logging out all of this data. So now this is the chance to try out and work with JSON again and go through this JSON object, an array with the objects inside of it, and pick out the information that you want to return back. And in this case, we want to do name first and last. So now instead of just returning back the value, we want to take that value and go name first, just like what we did within one of the earlier lessons, and then output that instead. So let's take value and then name first, and we'll see what we get returned back. So let's try that one more time. Go back out, refresh it, get user, save, refresh, get user, and we can see that we're getting all of these users' names. So we're getting the first names. So now, next step is to pick up the last names. So similar to what we just did with the first names, we can do the same thing literally for the last names as well. So let's add that in. So instead of name first, it's just name last. And we can also add in the index value. So that will put the index value, and it will also give you the first and last name. And usually I like to start with 1. So let's add 1 to that index value. So it's not starting at 0, because we know with arrays, the default value starts at 0. So there we go. So we've got a list of all the users, and this is fully dynamic. So if we're returning back 50 users, we can see that we're getting 50 different names and results there. So go ahead and try this out for yourself. And coming up next, we're going to tweak this solution Also getting them into uppercase, just using some JavaScript in order to accomplish that. So we're going to do some tweaks to our code that we're outputting. So go ahead and try this out for yourself. In the previous lesson, we saw how we can grab some data from an API and then use it, iterate through it, and use it within our JavaScript. And we can also make some updates to it. So if we wanted to set our first name value and then take that first name that's being returned back there, and we can add some JavaScript functionality. So there's two uppercase, and let's turn that into a method, and we're going to do the same thing for last name as well. So we're going to take the value and then again going down the object and taking that to uppercase, and then instead of having it within the return string, we can just pass in these new variables that we've just created with the JavaScript functionality. So you can do quite a bit with the data that's contained within that returned response, and then really make use of it, the data, and customize your code in order to output the data the way that you want it to be output. So let's see what that looks like. So let's refresh, get user. So now we're getting them all in uppercase. And we see that it's all uppercase, so ideally we want to capitalize this. So we'll add in one more function in here, and this is going to be a string prototype. So this gives you the ability to update the prototype for strings. So string prototype, and let's create a brand new one. We'll call it capitalize. So that way, whenever we render out capitalize, what we're going to do is we're going to transform that string value to uppercase. So do a return there, and we'll take this value and take character at. So we're going to take the first character, and we're going to bring that first character to uppercase. So just what we did earlier. And then also take that, and we're going to slice it at 1. So return that back. So now we can use capitalize instead of to uppercase. So that will create a capitalized effect within JavaScript. And this is how you can do some even more customizations. So throwing that in and update that to capitalize as well. So let's try that one out now as well. So go back out, refresh. So now we've got the capitalized users. And I think this is ideally what you want because they're users' names. So you get the first name, last name. And you can also make use of the other data here as well that's contained. So we see that we've got gender. We can also output pictures if we wanted to. So there's a lot of things that we can do there. So let's, coming up next, we'll do some more tweaks to the code that we're outputting, and we're going to output some of the images as well. So we'll really build out all of these elements that we're outputting. So some more tweaks coming up next. And it is important to kind of play around with what you've got available within the API and see what data is being returned back and challenge yourself to access that data and then output it in different ways, different formats within your HTML. So coming up next, some more tweaks to the code. In this lesson, I want to apply some more tweaks to the code. So right now we're able to generate some random users. And in this lesson, we wanted to look at some additional data that we can pull back from our user. So we've got the first name and last name that we've been working with, and we've got an option to pull back images as well. And we can also get additionally things like the email and so on. So let's bring the image into this list item. And we're going to also restructure the way that we're building out our JavaScript in order to actually create some HTML nodes. And then we're simply going to be returning this all back. And also I wanted to add in catch as well. So catch gives us the ability to catch if we're throwing any errors. And usually we just do error, so whatever error comes back, and then we output the error within the console. So we can see that if we are throwing any errors for whatever reason, we can actually see them within the console. So always a good idea when you're creating and using fetch that you do have the catch there as well. So the other thing that I want to add in, so let's just try that out. Just make sure that everything is still working properly, which it is. So we're good to go on. And this lesson, I also want to do a little bit more with the data that we're returning back. So what we've been doing right now, we're just building out a simple list item here and returning it back. So what I wanted to do instead is that we've got this map functionality. And instead of mapping it to the HTML, we want it to build it directly within the HTML. So we don't want to have to use the HTML variable. We simply want to just take that value and we want to return that back. So we want to do a return on that. So we want to incorporate all of that functionality here within what we're building out. And we're no longer going to be joining it. We're just going to be simply returning back all of that. So what we want to do now, we need to add to that output inner HTML all the list items. And I'm going to actually turn these into divs. So they're going to be a little bit different. They're not going to be list items. And now we need to grab that. I'm going to clean this up a little bit. So the way that this is going to work, and if you look at the code, there are some issues with this. So let's try that out, and then I'll explain how we can get around those. So right now, when I'm clicking it, I'm only getting the last user because we're actually just overwriting that inner HTML that we have available within output. So this isn't really ideal, and we need to find actually a better solution. So we need to take that element and we need to append that element as a child. So we want to actually create an element, and let's do it within this type of format as well. So we'll let div, so these are all temporaries, so every time it iterates through there, it's going to actually create an element, and we'll use document, and this is JavaScript, so create element. In case you want to add additional functionality into your elements, so first of all, let's create a div. And we're also going to create an image as well, because again, we want to grab that image information. So we're going to create an element, and the element that we're creating is going to be an image. So creating an image, creating a div, and then we're going to place the image within inside the div, and we're also going to then place the div, append it to output. Instead of doing the inner HTML, we're going to use append. So that's going to be the difference here. So let's take that new image that we created and let's apply a source to the image. So we have a value of people, and now we need to kind of go through what's being returned here. So let's make this a little bit smaller, and we can see that we want to actually get to the people, the images that's contained within the people. So how do you do that? If we go down, we see we've got all of this information. We've got picture, we've got large, medium, and thumbnail. When what we want to do is we want to grab that thumbnail and place it as the image source. So let's go down here. As we loop through the array, so we've got people and then picture. And then we just select the picture that we want, and we want to grab the thumbnail. So that's going to be the small one. We're going to grab the thumbnail, and then we're going to take that value and we're going to append it into that div. And we also want to create a span as well. So let's do our span and document. So again, we need to do a create element. And then we're just going to drop them one inside the other and then ultimately append that div to our output element. So creating a span. And then within the span, I want to add in some inner HTML. So within the span, we're going to have inner HTML. And then this is where we're actually going to put this information here. So we can grab it. I'll make it a little bit bigger so it's easier to read. All we're doing is we're using JavaScript append child, and then we're going to be appending the div to that output element. So all of the divs. So next, we need to place those values within the divs. So let me move this stuff up as well. So we want to place a few values and contain them within our div. So let's take our div, and we're going to use append child, and the child that we're going to append within the div. So the first one is going to be the span. So we'll append that, and then we'll take div and we're going to append another child into it, and the other child that we're appending into it is the image. And I just realized I used people here and I need to use the value instead of people, because people is that full array. So let's try that out again. So get user, and that way we can see that we're outputting all of the users' profiles along with their pictures. So these are again randomly generated. And this is another way, and probably a better way, to output that content. So every time we click get user, we're getting a new set of users and we're continuously appending those new users. So what we also want to do is every time it gets clicked, what we want to do is clear out that output, that inner HTML of output. So let's do that as well. So instead of, we'll grab our output and inner HTML, and we'll just equal that to be blank. So that's 2 single quotes. So that way it's going to always overwrite, because we see what's happening here is we're just constantly adding more users into our output HTML, and we don't want to be doing that. We want them refreshing and reloading, kind of like this. So perfect. So this is exactly what we're going for. And of course, you're welcome to style it even more, and also take a look through what available content is available within the JSON object and output some different content within your web page and try it out for yourself. Welcome back, and in this lesson you're going to need to have a Google account, because we're going to be using a spreadsheet. So just a regular Google spreadsheet, just going to be creating one right now, and this is just going to be our testing JSON spreadsheet, because in order to practice and test to make sure that you're become really familiar with JSON, it's really nice to be able to create your own database objects and your JSON objects to use. So we've got a couple fields that I'm entering in here. So I've got actually 4 different ones here, and I'm gonna make them a little bit bigger, bold them. So you can call them whatever you want. And then I'm just gonna populate some values in here. And of course, obviously not my real email, and then give an ID or whatever we want to call it. So this is just to practice, because what we want to do is we want to fetch the data that we've got contained within our Google spreadsheet and then output it within our application. So I want to make sure that we've got a nice sampling of some emails and some data there that we can then output. And I'll show you how to output it as well. So we'll call it Jane Doe. Jane Doe or Jane Joe, it doesn't really matter. So once you've got some data in there, so this is just regular Google spreadsheet, and you can actually publish it to the web, and you can output it within a JSON format. And we're going to do this, and then we're going to grab the data and then output it within our website. So in order to publish it to the web, just go to File and click Publish to the web. And then this is going to give you an option here to publish to the web, so you can publish the entire document, or you can just select one sheet. And you've got some options here, and we just want to stay with the web page. And then also there's some options here for publish content and settings and so on. So let's go ahead and publish. So we're just publishing this, and we've got the ability to share this. So anyone with this URL is going to be able to see that data, and I'll show you what that looks like. So this isn't exactly what we want to use, but we can see that that content gets output onto the web. So in order to get it within a JSON format, there's actually a URL for that, and it requires you to copy out your spreadsheet ID. So just grabbing that ID there. And now let's go over to our editor. So open that editor back up, and we can clear out most of the stuff we have here. And I'm also going to minimize this one as well. So go back out to our application that we're building, and I'm going to get rid of the test map, so because we don't need to make use of that. So I'll get rid of some of the code that's here. We'll keep the output so that we can still make use of it. I'll get rid of all of the tester stuff. And we can get rid of the prototype. Probably not going to need it. Also, we're going to keep the output so we can output that content. And we're going to update this URL, and we're going to fetch the URL. So yeah, we can clear out the output in our HTML, so that's fine. We can keep that. We want to return it back within a JSON format, and then we want to take that data, and we're not going to have the same returned results. So first of all, what we want to do is simply output it within our console so we can take a closer look and we can see actually what's happening with that data. So we get rid of all of that stuff from the earlier lesson, and we're simply going to just output it as JSON. So let's just make sure things are still working. So everything is still working with the previous API, and now we're going to try to connect to the application that we just built. So this is the URL in order to do that. So we can get rid of this as the URL. So this is spreadsheets.google.com, and then you need to / to feeds and then to list, and then this is where you paste your spreadsheet ID. So that's the ID as well, or you could just do const ID to make it a little bit shorter. So we can take that ID value and then just simply drop it into our string value there. So that's going to contain the ID value. And then there's still a little bit more left to the string. So /, so it's OD6 and public basic with a question mark alt equals JSON. So this should be able to output that content within a JSON format. So let's try that out. And we can see that we're actually getting something returned, so that's good news, of course. And we can see that it's being returned back as JSON. So now let's take a closer look at this. And what I want you to do now as well, if you do have a Google account, then go ahead, open up the spreadsheet and output your content, create some content within the spreadsheet, and then take a closer look at that content and see what you want to output. And I'll show you how to do that, how to grab all the elements that are available there, and then how you can output them within your web page. So I'll show you that coming up next. So for now, just set up your Google spreadsheet and grab the JSON data that's being output for it. We saw that we're able to return back a feed, and if we actually change this to values, we're going to get a better JSON feed. So let's try that out. So right now, this is the one that we're getting, and we've got our feed here, but we want to get all the data and all the information. So it looks the same, but now when you go into entry, you can see that there's even more information. And each one of these GSX, so we've got email, first name, and ID, and last name, and they coincide with the values that we have here. So there's email, first name, last name, and ID. So they're all represented within this GSX format. So that means that now we can take that data and we can actually loop through it. So let's navigate down through all of our JSON data that's coming again from our Google spreadsheet. And instead of just data, we're going to do feed. And then within the feed, we want to get the entry. So this should produce our array of data that we want to make use of. And we know that because we have 3 lines, we get 3 options, 3 being returned there. So now if I refresh it, I get 4. So each one of the lines here, or the rows within my spreadsheet, is going to be represented by another item within the array, and we see that they're all formatted within the same way. So that makes it really easy to grab that data and then make use of it. And in this case, we're just going to do a simple for loop. So we're going to start out by letting x equal 0. We'll set this up to our entry, and then we're going to loop while x is less than the length of entry. So there's a number of ways to go through the data that's available. And for now, let's simply log out. So we'll log out entry and get the value of x. And then we're going to dive deeper into getting that data. So again, let's refresh it because we only have the 4 there. So what we want to do is we actually want to output this information into our HTML. So we're going to do it really simple within this time, where we're just going to simply grab all the items. So let's do let, and we'll do email. And so email is going to equal entry and index value of x. and then we can grab the value of it by using GSX and then grabbing that email object. And then also we need to get the value of t, because this is again an object within an object, so a little bit tricky, but of course great practice when you're trying to practice and use various JSON formats. So let's see what happens. So there we go. We see we're able to output all of those emails, and we can do the same thing for the other entries as well. So we had our email, and let's copy this out. So we had our email, and let's look at the other values that we had. So we also had first name, we had last name, and we have ID. So we know that it's all lowercase. So we'll update this to be lowercase. We'll update this just to be first name. So we can just call this first. So we'll just keep it a little bit shorter here. And then this is last, and then this is going to be last name. So let's try that one more time. Make sure we don't throw any errors. So we're still outputting that information. So now, as we loop through, let's do output inner HTML, and we're just going to add to it. So let's build out our inner HTML. And we have a number of options. We can do it similar to how we did it last time as well. So it's all up to you. Whatever method works best for you. So I'm going to do a little bit of space. I'll make this bigger so we can see the string as we're building it out. So then this is going to contain the last name, and I'll space that out. And then next, let's do our email address. And again, just this is just spacing it out. And of course, you can style it probably way better than what I'm doing here. And then we'll just close off that div. So now I think we are ready to try this out and see what it looks like within our web page. So click, and there we go. So we get all of that data coming in. You can update that data to be whatever you want. And then every time you click it, you get that newly updated data. And this is also a great way just to become familiar with working with JSON, outputting that data from your JSON, and you can really easily update it. You can add values, so you could do a new value, and we can just call it test, and then add that one in as needed as well. So go ahead and try this out for yourself, and a great way to practice and become even more familiar with JSON. In this lesson, we're going to do a quick overview of what we learned and what we saw in the earlier lessons. So we started out by introducing how different data types behave within JavaScript. And we know that with different data types, we can mix and match them, add them together. And as we saw in the later part of the course, sometimes those JSON objects can be fairly complex, where there's an object and then there's an array within those objects, and then there's also objects within that array, and so on and so on. It can go fairly deep. So it's important to understand the basics, where the different data types that are available and how we can access them and how they can all fit together one inside of the other. And then if you want to retrieve back that information, how you can navigate to get the values using the named value in order to retrieve back the value that you're looking for. We also saw how we can use JSON, and we can stringify JSON, and then we can also output it back into a usable format. So this was taking it from an object format, turning it into a string, bring it back into an object, making an update to it, and then turning it back into a string. So this is very useful, and it's very important, again, to understand this, that this is all possible, and there are use cases where you definitely need to turn those objects into strings, and then, of course, if you've got a string, to make it usable, you can turn it back into an object. And we saw how that works with local storage, where we can add content into our local storage, we can view our local storage, and this is all done and accomplished using our stringify and the different methods to transform that content into a string version and then parse it back. So we saw how that worked, and we saw how we can output that information. We could add it to storage and we can view what's in the storage. And we also tweaked it and set up some defaults so that if there's nothing in the storage, that we're just outputting none. So we saw how that all fit together and the usefulness of making use of those JavaScript objects. We also saw how we can connect to different APIs and JSON objects online. So we created a bin in the myJSON bin, and this was just a really simple JSON object that we had created, and we posted that online, and then we retrieved it on our local machine and output it within our web page. And that was the objective, to just become familiar that there's web APIs and we can get content from those web APIs. Next, we looked at an API that had a bunch of information that it was returning back, and then we made use of that information that was returned back. We pulled out a first name and a last name, and we updated this information that's coming from the API, dynamically generated from the server, and then we updated our HTML. And we also saw how we can extend that functionality and how we can build out some really nice functionality doing that, where we could build out using the map method, and also we could retrieve back multiple results, and then how we can navigate through those results and get access to the data that we're looking for. So that particular value, whatever you're looking for, you should be comfortable enough, and if you're not, then always go back and practice with these various web APIs in order to navigate through the different objects that are contained within the JavaScript arrays and get to the various values that you're looking for. So challenge yourself, try to get back the state, postal code, coordinates, login information, and really navigate deep into the JSON API to try that out. So we saw how that worked, and we also added some tweaks and adjustments to bring in images and customize the output using some JavaScript functionality. And this is where you can really see how you can make use of JSON data within your JavaScript, where you can create things like various prototypes and then update that data as it comes in, and then output it within different types of formats on your web page. So we saw how that all fits together. And then finally, we also saw a great way to practice working with JSON, where you can use your Google Sheet, you can output it, publish it to the web, and then that gives you the ability to access it using the spreadsheet google.com feeds, lists, ODA public, values, and then alt API, and we're able to retrieve back that data. We can also see that if we simply go to the basic, we get a basic feedback, but it's not really ideal in order to output that data into our web page, and that's why we needed to use values. So we saw that in the last lesson, where we're outputting those values, and we're able to actually grab and navigate to the various columns and rows and output that data within our HTML page. We also saw that there's a number of different great resources online. So going into JSON lint. So this is a great way to lint your JSON to make sure that you've got some valid JSON, and also making it more readable. So when you've got a bunch of stuff there without any white space, a little bit hard to read. So these validators and linters are a great way to go. There's also a JSON generator. And then when you press generate, you can see that this generates out a bunch of JSON data, and there really is truly a lot of it. So then you could just put in the validator and also get it more readable, and you see that this is valid JSON. So make sure that you generate it. There's a number of different templates that you can use, and this is another great way to practice and really get used to working with JSON. You could also take this and post that into your JSON bin. So you could go to the myJSON, post it in there, save it, and then this will give you a URL to access a bunch of data online and then practice pulling it into your web pages. And then there's also the output with the myJSON bins, the way that they're going to look. So this one, if we take this one and if we output it, So this one's going to be way more complex. And you can see that just as a string value, it's not very readable. So again, bring it into the JSON lint to make it more readable. So these were some great ways. And this was another one, the object generator. Gave you a quick and simple way to generate some JSON data, and then you can use this to practice as well and make use of it within your JavaScript. And the best way to learn, of course, is to practice. So open up your editor and practice with the tools that we presented within the course, how to use JSON and bring it into your web pages.